started basically paying attention to what was around me, trying to absorb Indianness somehow. I spent a lot of time in Pondicherry, all the time taking notes, and notes could be anything from the names of trees to be found in Pondicherry, to little scenes, to ideas. I started reading. I never read religious texts, so I started reading the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, some of the Upanishads. Then I went back to Montreal. I was living in Montreal at the time, and I did about another 2 years of research. So research on religion, on zoo biology, on shipwrecks, and all the while writing scenes. And after about 2 years, I had enough material, and then I wrote the book. And everything was planned out. So as you know, the book is divided into 100 chapters as an author's note. Well, I wrote it in chronological order, and when I wrote the very first line of the author's note, I already knew how the book would end. So I knew exactly that chapter 100 would be a note from the investigators reacting to their encounter with pi. So I knew that all along. The way I write is I have all these notes, I print them up, I cut them up, put them in envelopes. And the envelopes are the backbone of each chapter. So the first envelope is called author's note, and I open it up, and there are all these little bit elements. And then I start writing. And then the next chapter will be chapter 1, that chapter where pi is already in Canada, and he just describes the studies of E with T and all that. Well, that would be maybe 1 or 2 envelopes. No, that was probably 1 envelope. I'd look at them, and some would be junk I'd put aside, others go straight into the novel, very, no editing. And so I just went from envelope to envelope until I got to chapter 100. So I'm very, very much, and I can't imagine personally writing any other way, because, what happens in chapter 10 will affect what happens in chapter 90. And there are many writers who write completely different. Many writers just write in a much more spontaneous way, but ones who sort of say that their characters speak to them. Michael Ondaatje is like that, for example. He writes in a much more spontaneous, he's sort of guided by his intuition. I can't do that. In a sense, like an architect, if I'm going to build a building, I have to know what it's for. Is it going to be for a university, a hospital? Is it a sports stadium? Form follows function. I have to know the purpose of something, and then I can determine how I'll write about it. So everything for me is very planned out. It's still a wonderful thing to write, to see it appear on the computer, paragraph after paragraph. It feels like the construction of a cathedral. It's a beautiful. To me, a novel is not the book itself. It's very much something in my mind, in my head, and it's that thrilling. It's contradicting King Lear. It is something coming out of nothing. It's out of the nothingness of your mind. You start working on this story, and that's the most thrilling element. Building it brick by brick. And so I do it very, very slowly. I'm a very slow writer. I'm 48 and I've only written 4 books. I've been doing it full time since my mid-20s. So God knows what I've been doing all those years, but that's wonderful. So I'm very, very slow. Very, very slow in thought.